Welcome to Truth Be Told About Going Wild. I'm your host, Robert Hensley, and this is the podcast inspired by the principles of personal rewilding. Now, over the last few months, we've talked a lot about personal rewilding, what that means, what the practice means, how we can kind of tap into that connection with the natural world. And I'd just like to remind everyone that rewilding is a word taken from ecological restoration projects, from nature conservationists. And it does tend to feel very contemporary, right? But the practice itself is not new, right? So if we're looking across the diversity of North America, right, cultures and communities have long cultivated traditions that reconnect individuals to land, to the seasons, to animals, to their ancestral memory. Personal rewilding isn't just about finding a way to connect to nature in spite of modern life, but it's really about remembering how we belong to a place, right? Most people come into personal rewilding feeling a sense of loss or detachment, that they don't belong, that they don't have a purpose. And that's really what personal rewilding is all about. Now we want to today talk about and explore this idea of personal rewilding and how these traditions appear across the diverse ecological and cultural regions of North America, right? We're going to talk about these traditions from the Arctic Tundra all the way to the desert plateau, from forested mountains to coastal wetlands. All right, we're taking a trip around North America and talking about these traditions of returning or reconnecting to nature. So if we look at the far north, right, among the Inuit and the Inupiat and other Arctic indigenous communities, personal rewilding is inseparable from survival knowledge. Hiking, hunting, fishing, tracking, navigation across sea ice, these are not considered recreational skills, right? They are relationships that have been maintained through observation, patience, humility, and time. These are ancestral traditions. Time on the land for these folks is central. Young people learn by accompanying their elders on hunting trips, absorbing lessons about wind patterns and animal migration, snow conditions, and spiritual respect for the animals who give their lives. Silence, endurance, and attunement to subtle environmental cues are cultivated as virtues. Now, if we're looking at the modern North rewilding movements, many of those practices really kind of revive the teachings through land camps and language revitalization programs. These practices restore more than just food security, but it's really about placemaking. It's about restoring identity that's rooted in the land and their relationship to their environment, right? Pacific Northwest, we think about North America, especially the U.S., not really having rainforests, but we do, right? The temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest have long nurtured cultures grounded in the idea of reciprocal relationships. So we're talking about indigenous tribes like the coastal Salish, the Haida, the Tlingit, and other nations. To them, the forest and the ocean are kin. They're not resources. Traditional practices such as seasonal salmon harvests, cedar bark weaving, canoe journeys, these all foster a very deep ecological literacy among these tribes, among these nations. Harvesting follows protocols of gratitude and restraint. There are stories and songs that are encoded environmental knowledge, teaching each person how to live within abundance without exhausting what's there naturally. Now, in the Pacific Northwest, contemporary rewilding in that region often includes things like forest bathing, wild crafting, mushroom foraging, and communal restoration projects. The deeper traditions, right? Those traditions of relationship with the land, that reciprocity, that still remains. That gets tied in. And to rewild in the Pacific Northwest is to re-enter a web of reciprocity with the river, the cedars, and the tides. As we move into the Great Plains, we're really looking at these vast grasslands in the center of the continent. And there's a different kind of awareness that comes with having a relationship with the plains, right? It's horizontal, it's expansive, sky-oriented. So historically, the plains nations such as the Lakota, Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Comanche, they shaped their lifeways around bison migrations and seasonal movement, right? Really following food sources around these vast plains. Personal rewilding traditions in the region of the Great Plains really emphasize mobility, horsemanship, ceremony that's tied to open landscapes. The idea of vision quests, these ceremonies that are undertaken alone in prairie solitude reflect an intimate dialogue with the wind, stars, and silence. When we look at prairie restoration and bison reintroduction programs, they carry a kind of a parallel personal dimension, right? Spending extended time outside, learning traditional tracking skills, and engaging in sweat lodge ceremonies are used to reconnect participants with the rhythms of the land. And so the plains really teach this idea of resilience and humility beneath a vast sky. Okay. As we move then into the Southwest and the desert regions, we're looking at indigenous nations like the Dene, or the Navajo, the Hopi, Apache, the Tohono O'odham. These are the nations that thrive in the deserts of the Southwest, the Sonoran Desert, the Mojave, Chihuahuan. And they have developed agricultural and ceremonial systems that are aligned to the scarcity of water and to extreme heat. So personal rewilding in this region is more about conservation of energy, the respect for water, and spiritual orientation towards cardinal directions and sacred landscapes. Their practices tend to center around fasting, pilgrimages, and time spent in solitude among the rocks, the canyons, and there's a long-standing tradition of self-refinement. Today, in these kind of desert-based areas, rewilding often includes wilderness solos, herbalism, and traditional dryland farming techniques. The desert strips away excess and sharpens perception, and that austerity is really honored, and individuals rediscover their clarity and interdependence through those practices. Now, the Eastern Woodlands, these areas of the Northeast and Southeast foster traditions that are grounded in seasonal cycles. So from maple sugaring in late winter, wild rice harvesting, autumn hunting, spring planting, we're looking at nations like the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Cherokee. These and other nations share a great ecological knowledge. It's embedded into every ceremony and story. If we look at the Thanksgiving address of the Haudenosaunee, for example, that explicitly acknowledges gratitude for water, plants, animals, wind, sun, moon. It's an articulation of reciprocal awareness. Now today, in our modern society, rewilding in the Eastern Woodlands often includes skills like tracking, primitive skill gathering, wild edible foraging, and permaculture homesteading. And these are all, again, pulling in traditions from these indigenous nations. The emphasis tends towards rebuilding local food systems and restoring the forest. Here, rewilding means rejoining the seasonal round. And that's really, I feel, a little bit about kind of where I'm based at the moment. Now, the Appalachia, right? Appalachia, this region, it blends indigenous knowledge with Scots, Irish, and African influences, which have kind of become a very distinct land-based culture. So herbal medicine traditions, foraging knowledge, small-scale subsistence farmings, that's all really very deeply rooted in the Appalachian Mountain Range. Personal rewilding in Appalachia often manifests through wildcrafting, things like harvesting ginseng and ramps, storytelling, music. Music is a big part of it, and maintaining woodlots. There's a cultural value placed on self-reliance and having that be balanced with really tight-knit communities. So in the Appalachian Mountains, we're really looking at this kind of fostered intimacy versus any sort of focus on the vastness of the world around these peoples. And rewilding here, it feels close and tactile and familial. So knowing where to find chanterelles, where to find ginseng, where to find ramps, where the creek runs clean after the rain. I mean, this is all kind of stuff that flows through here. And I feel, I guess, now thinking about it, I'm probably personally somewhere between the Eastern Woodlands and the Appalachia kind of systems of rewilding, because both of those feel very, very familiar to me. Now, in the coastal and Gulf regions, right? So we're looking at an area that really their personal rewilding traditions revolve around tides, estuaries, storm cycles. These are fishing communities like the Gullah Geechee, Cajun Bayou culture, and there are numerous indigenous coastal nations that really carry a very deep water knowledge. Shrimping, oyster harvesting, boat building, hurricane preparation. This all fosters resilience and an ecological fluency. Living with water requires them to be flexible and to respect the forces of nature, everything that is beyond human control. Contemporary rewilding in coastal areas really still includes a lot of sea foraging, salt marsh restoration, traditional boat skills. They find their connection to maybe not so much green spaces, but to blue spaces, the sea. That's where they learn adaptability and humility, lessons that are increasingly relevant in an area when climate change is really kind of disturbing all of our lives, right? Now, if we're looking across the United States or across North America being the greater picture here, cities. Cities are a place where we're really losing a lot of these traditions, right? But where there's a quiet community of rewilding that is emerging. And so when we're looking at kind of this idea of urban rewilding, we're looking at community gardens, rooftop beekeeping, park stewardship, urban foraging, this idea of people trying to reconnect more with the land, and even sometimes reclaiming areas of land in spite of all of the concrete. So urban indigenous organizations host all kinds of cultural camps and ceremonies within city boundaries, maintaining a continually or maintain continuity, despite this idea of displacement. So rewilding here becomes an act of really reclamation. It's about reclaiming ancestral memory, reclaiming space, reclaiming that sense of belonging to the land. So personal rewilding in urban spaces often begins with really attention, right? Observation, noticing birdsong, right? Not just listening to traffic, but hearing the sounds of birds, hearing where nature comes in to the city, learning the names of the plants that we see growing through the sidewalks, right? Learning to grow herbs on our balconies. Anytime we have this idea that we cannot rewild or that people have lost too much in cities, there's still a bit of wildness that persists, right? These fragments. And we can still connect to those. And we can make those bigger, right? That's important too. So I think if we've taken everything in from the entire continent, from all of North America, we know that despite the ecological differences, that there are common themes that emerge across North America when it comes to these traditions of personal rewilding. Reciprocity over extraction, seasonal awareness, skill transmission across generations, ceremony and story as ecological memory, and this idea of humility in the face of a larger system, right? So rewilding isn't just this mythic idea. It's something that is very tangible. It's about restoring relationships, right? Relationships with each other, with our ancestral memory, with nature itself. And in many cases, there are indigenous communities that have tried to safeguard these relational frameworks despite colonization and environmental disruption. And contemporary rewilding movements have increasingly recognized the importance of learning respectfully and supporting indigenous sovereignty and land stewardship to learn some of these skills and take this to a larger audience to apply what knowledge there is to a larger market, if we want to say that. Because rewilding is belonging, right? It's this idea that, yes, traditions may be different, language may be different, but we see the similarities. We know that we're all connected, right? And if we can connect everything together and feel not just tied to the place where we're sitting at this particular moment, but also tied to the land as a whole, to North America as one giant piece to a much larger puzzle, then the tundra, the forests, the prairies, deserts and mountains and coasts, they don't feel like independent, separate pieces, right? They're all connected. They're all part of something much bigger. And I think for most people who seek out personal rewilding, who want that sense of belonging, that sense of purpose, that's what we're looking for, the bigger picture, where we fit into the bigger picture, right? So, with that being said, I'd like to thank you so much for listening today, and I hope that you will join me again. Remember, there are 3 opportunities each week for new content on the Club Paranormal channel on YouTube. With the Truth Be Told family of podcasts. That's Tony Sweet on Fridays with the original Truth Be Told, Bonnie Burkett on Wednesdays with Truth Be Told Transformation, of course me with Truth Be Told About Going Wild every Monday, and our shows go live at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 Eastern on their respective days. If you'd like more information about what I'm doing with personal rewilding, you can always visit my website. That is www.rhnatureconnect.com. Again, that's rhnatureconnect.com. And you can also join my Personal Rewilding with Robert Hensley community on Patreon. And you could simply just go to patreon.com and search Personal Rewilding with Robert Hensley, and you'll see my community. It pops up, and you can choose from 2 tiers, free or a paid exclusive membership, $15 a month. A lot of really interesting stuff there as well. So until next time.